After 6 years in Canada working double shifts in freezing temperatures, sleeping in a room she could cross in 4 steps, eating the cheapest food she could find, and sending every dollar she earned home to the man she was going to marry, Nkechi finally decided to come home and surprise him. She had never seen the house her money had built in person. She had only seen the photographs he sent her, those beautiful photographs of walls going up and rooms taking shape and a life assembling itself on the other side of the world from where she was suffering to build it. She arrived at the airport on a Thursday morning, took a taxi straight to the address she knew by heart, walked through the iron gate of the house she had paid for with 6 years of her life, heard the music before she saw the crowd, and stood at the entrance of her own home to find the man she had sacrificed everything for standing at an altar inside it, marrying her own sister. And when he saw her, when his eyes found her at the entrance to the yard, he did not look sorry. He looked inconvenienced. Stay with me. Because what happened next is not what either of them expected. And the full truth of this story is going to stay with you for a very long time. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. Nkechi Obi grew up in Onitsha in a neighborhood where the streets were always busy and the air was always full of the specific combination of market noise and cooking smells that tells you are home even when you are standing somewhere unfamiliar. Her father was an English teacher at a secondary school, a meticulous man who loved books and corrected grammar in casual conversation without meaning to. Her mother sold fabric from a stall in the main market, a stall she had been running for 20 years with the focused efficiency of someone who has converted industry into instinct. They were not wealthy, but they were respected, which in the community they lived in was sometimes worth more than money. Nkechi had grown up watching both her parents work hard and keep their word, and these two things had become her own governing principles without her ever formally deciding to adopt them. She studied economics at university. She graduated with results that made her parents put the certificate up on the wall. She came back to Onitsha and worked at a bank while she figured out what came next. She was not in a hurry. She had always been a person who thought before she moved. This quality made her excellent at her work and occasionally frustrating to be around, depending on the urgency of the situation. Then Chidi arrived in her life and rearranged the furniture of her thinking in ways she had not anticipated. Chidi Ease was the kind of man who made an entrance without trying to make an entrance, which is the most effective kind. He was tall and well-built and had the particular energy of someone whose confidence comes from competence rather than performance. He was a civil engineer who had been working on road construction projects in different parts of the country and had returned to Onitsha to oversee a new contract in the region. He met Nkechi at a family friend's birthday party where she was the person not dancing and he was the person who noticed the person not dancing and came to stand beside her with a drink and said the dancing was not as interesting as it thought it was. She had laughed. He had laughed. They had talked for 3 hours. She had driven home thinking about the conversation. They dated for 2 years. He was thoughtful in the way that she valued, which was to say he thought before he spoke and what he said when he spoke was usually worth having said. He asked questions and listened to the answers with the actual attention of someone who wanted the answer rather than someone waiting for their turn to talk. He brought her groundnuts and sat beside her while she worked on her laptop and did not fill the silence with noise. He talked about the future with a specificity that made it feel solid rather than hypothetical. He wanted to build something. A real estate business eventually, using his engineering knowledge and his understanding of how buildings were made and what made them last. He wanted a house that was theirs. He wanted a life that was intentional. She believed every word of it because the 2 years of evidence she had been collecting supported the belief. Her aunt on her father's side had been in Canada for 15 years and had built a stable and comfortable life working in industrial facilities. She visited Onitsha the year Nkechi and Chidi had been together and told Nkechi there was a position available at the facility where she worked. The pay was significantly more than the bank. The exchange rate made the difference extraordinary. If she was disciplined about it, the numbers her aunt showed her across 3 evenings of conversation suggested she could change the shape of her life within 4 years. Maybe 5. Definitely within 6. She came to Chidi with the idea. He listened to everything. He sat with it for a week and then came back and said go. He held her hands and said he would wait. He said she should send money home when she could and he would find land and build their house, and by the time the house was finished she would come back and they would begin the next part of their lives together. He said it with the quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision and means it. She cried at the airport when she left. He held her face in his hands and said this was not goodbye, it was a head start. Her mother cried also. Her father straightened his glasses and told her to keep her receipts, which was his way of saying be careful and come back to us. The facility in Ontario was the hardest environment Nkechi had ever been in. She worked 12 to 14-hour shifts in temperatures that the body never fully adjusts to no matter how many months pass. The work was physical in a way her bank job had not prepared her for, and the tiredness at the end of each shift was a different category of tired from anything she had previously experienced, a tiredness that went into the bones rather than just sitting on the surface. She lived in a shared house with 4 other women, in a room that was small but sufficient, and she ate simply and spent carefully and sent the rest home to Chitty. The system they established was straightforward. She would send money on the 15th of each month. Chitty would confirm receipt and update her on the building progress. He sent photographs regularly in the first 2 years. The land being cleared. The foundation being laid. The walls going up. She would look at those photographs on her phone in the evenings in her small room and feel the sacrifice make sense. She could see it. She could see the life being built on the other side of all this cold and difficulty, and she held the vision the way you hold a lamp in the dark, not because the lamp makes the dark disappear but because it makes the direction visible. Her younger sister Adora was her most regular phone contact from home after Chitty. Adora was 26 and Nkechi's 31 and had the particular energy of a younger sibling who has grown up in the shadow of a capable older one and has developed her own very specific way of occupying space as a result. She was louder than Nkechi, more social, more willing to take up room in a conversation. Nkechi loved her with the uncomplicated love of an older sister who has made peace with the fact that they are simply different people. Adora called every week. She talked about the neighborhood, about their parents, about her own life and her own plans and her own opinions about everything. Nkechi listened and laughed and told her about Canada, and they maintained across the distance the particular warmth of sisters who have never needed to try very hard with each other. She did not know that Adora was spending time with Chitty. She did not know this because nobody told her, which required the active cooperation of several people who knew and chose not to say, and the active effort of 2 people who were making a choice and managing the information around it carefully. She did not know because Chitty's calls remained consistently warm and consistently detailed about the building and consistently forward-looking about their shared future. She did not know because Adora's calls remained consistently sisterly and consistently warm and did not contain the specific information that would have been relevant. She did not know because 6 years is a long time to be far from the people you love, and the information you receive about them is only ever the information they choose to send. The money went every month. Every month without exception, sent on the 15th, confirmed received, applied toward the building. The building was finished in the 5th year. After that the money went toward the furnishing, then toward the landscaping, then toward things Chitty described as finishing touches, a gate, outdoor lights, fittings for the kitchen. Nkechi accepted each new request with the patience of a woman who has decided that the destination justifies the journey and has committed to the journey completely. Then in the 6th year on a Tuesday evening Chitty called and told her the house was done. He described it in detail. He said it was everything they had talked about. He said she needed to come home and see it. He said come soon. She saved every extra dollar for 6 weeks. She bought a ticket. She bought a dress, the first dress she had bought for herself in 6 years, a beautiful deep red dress that she wore on the plane, feeling the particular extravagance of a person who has been denying themselves things for so long that a dress feels like an event. She did not tell Chitty she was coming. She wanted to see his face when he saw her. She wanted the moment to be unmanaged and genuine. She landed on a Thursday morning. The air of home came through the terminal doors and she stood in it with her eyes closed for a long moment, breathing it back in, the warmth and the noise and the specific aliveness of a Nigerian city that Canada had never quite replicated in 6 years of trying. She took a car to the neighborhood. She rolled the window down and watched the streets go by and smiled at everything, the women selling things on the roadside, the children in uniforms, the particular chaos that she had complained about for years before leaving and had missed every day since. She found the address. The house was real in a way that photographs had not prepared her for. It rose from the street with the confidence of something built to last, tall cream walls and large windows and a black iron gate with the outdoor lights already on in the morning. She stood outside it and felt the specific emotion that comes when something you have imagined for 6 years becomes three-dimensional and you are standing in front of it. This was built with her hands. Not literally but actually. Every shift, every cold morning, every meal eaten plain, every coat not bought had contributed to these walls. She pushed the gate open. The music reached her before the crowd did. Then the crowd, rows of chairs arranged in the courtyard, white and gold flowers everywhere, people in their finest clothes filling every seat, and at the front under a canopy of flowers the kind of setup that could only mean one thing, an altar, a ceremony in progress, a wedding. She stood at the entrance of the yard she had paid for and her eyes moved to the front of it and she saw Chitty standing there and she saw the woman beside him and she saw the dress the woman was wearing and she knew the dress. She had seen her sister wear clothes from that designer before. She knew the way her sister stood, the angle of her shoulders, the particular way she held herself. She knew Adora. For a moment nothing moved, not in her body and not in the yard, though the yard was full of people and sound and the ordinary motion of a celebration. For a moment she stood at the entrance to her own home in the red dress she had bought 6 weeks ago as the first thing she had bought for herself in 6 years and the world simply refused to reorganize itself into something that made sense. Then Chitty saw her. She watched his face move through something in the fraction of a second before it settled into what it would show for the rest of the encounter, and what it moved through was not guilt, at least not in the sustained way of someone who is genuinely reckoning with what they have done. It was something briefer and more reflexive than guilt, and what replaced it was the particular composure of a man who has already decided how this goes. He said something quietly to Adora and crossed the courtyard toward Nkechi without hurrying, with the unhurried quality of a man who does not believe there is anything in front of him that he cannot manage. He stopped in front of her. He said, "Why are you here?" He said it at a volume that carried to the people nearby, not loudly but not quietly either. She said his name and then she said, "What is this?" He looked around the courtyard with the expression of someone whose answer to the question is obvious. He said, "What does it look like?" By now the music had stopped and the guests closest to them were completely still and the attention of the yard was moving in their direction the way water moves toward a drain, without being directed, simply pulled. Chitty said the house was beautiful, wasn't it? He said she had to admit she had good taste in sending money. He said these things in a tone that was not quite casual but was close enough to casual to be worse than casual, the tone of a man who has decided that the best way through this is simply to be honest about the calculation he has made. He said she had been essential to the building phase. He said every project had a building phase and a living phase and these were different phases requiring different things. He gestured at the wedding, at the flowers, at the yard. He said this was the living phase. Adora had come to stand beside him. She looked at Nkechi with the expression of someone who has prepared for this moment over a long period and has decided that preparation is the same as readiness, which it is not, because seeing your sister standing at the entrance to the house she paid for in the red dress she bought to come home in is not something that preparation adequately addresses. Adora said she was sorry. She said it in the way of someone saying the word without transmitting the substance of it. Nkechi looked at her sister for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at Chitty. She said nothing to him. She did not give him a response that could be used as a scene. She turned around. She picked up her bag. She walked back through the iron gate. She walked out of her own house and into the street and kept walking. Now friends, I need to stop here for just a moment because if you are watching this and something in your chest has broken open, you are exactly where Bishop Tails wants you to be. Please like this video right now and leave a comment. Tell us, what would you have done if you were standing at that gate? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now because this story has a very long way still to go and where it goes from here is going to surprise you completely. She walked through streets she knew from childhood and did not know where she was going, and the not knowing was acceptable for the time being because forward was the only direction available. The tears came without permission the way tears do when they have been held past their capacity and find the release they have been looking for. She found a low wall at the edge of a quieter street and sat on it and allowed the crying to be what it was, not polite and not contained, the kind that takes over the body completely and leaves you empty in the way that emptying sometimes precedes filling. She cried for 6 years of double shifts. She cried for the room in Ontario that she could cross in 4 steps. She cried for every meal eaten plain when eating well would have cost the money she was sending home. She cried for the dress she had bought herself 6 weeks ago as the first beautiful thing she had allowed herself in all that time, and she cried for the homecoming she had imagined and the one that had actually happened and the distance between the two. When there was nothing left, she sat in the warm Nigerian evening and breathed. She stayed with her parents for 3 days. Her mother brought food and sat with her in the evenings and asked the specific questions that mothers ask when they are trying to understand without pushing. Her father sat with her on the second evening on the veranda and said, after a long silence, "What will you do now?" She said, "Go back. Back to Canada. Back to work." He said, "In the house." She said she had sent everything freely. There was nothing in writing and she had done it willingly, and she was not going to spend her energy trying to recover what was legally unrecoverable. She said she was going to start again. Her father nodded slowly and said nothing further. It was enough. On the morning of the 3rd day she packed her bag and returned to the airport. She moved through the departure terminal with her face composed and her heart in the particular state of something that has been broken and has not yet decided what shape to become when it begins to heal. She reached her gate early. She sat down. That was when she noticed the man. He was perhaps 75 years old, sitting in the gate seating area with the particular quality of overwhelm of someone who is managing too many things simultaneously and losing control of all of them. He had 4 bags, 2 large rolling suitcases, a carry-on, and a briefcase, all of which were in various states of rolling away from him or failing to stay closed while he was simultaneously trying to read his boarding pass on a phone whose screen he was squinting at and whose operation was clearly causing him significant difficulty. The people around him walked past without looking up. The gate area had the specific self-absorption of airport spaces where everyone has somewhere to be. Nkechi stood up and walked over. She said, "Excuse me, can I help?" The man looked up with the genuine surprise of someone who stopped expecting help a long time ago. He said that was very kind and that he seemed to have rather more luggage than was sensible. He had a Canadian accent, slightly formal, the accent of someone who has spent a long time in one place. She asked where he was going. He said Toronto. She said the same flight. She said, "Let us sort this out." For the next 2 hours she helped him. She organized his bags and helped him check in at the desk and sat beside him at the gate and helped him locate his digital boarding pass in the confusion of his email account. He was a sharp man, clearly intelligent, but the technology was genuinely beyond him, and he accepted her help with the particular gracious relief of someone who is proud but not too proud to accept assistance when assistance is clearly necessary. When they reached the small airport cafe and he tried to pay for his tea and his card declined, he looked at it with the expression of a man confronting a machine that has failed him in a public and specific way. Nkechi paid without making it a moment. When they arrived in Toronto and his car service was not where it was supposed to be and his phone was not able to load the app to book another, she helped him find a taxi. When the taxi came and he reached for his card and the card declined again, she saw the specific private shame of a proud person caught in a helpless situation twice in the same journey, and she paid for the taxi without calculation. $60 she did not easily have. The man sat in the taxi and looked at her through the window before it pulled away. He said she had a genuinely good heart and that the world had not managed to ruin it, and he hoped it never did. He said, "Get home safely, Ms. Nkechi." She said, "Get home safely, Mr. Osei." The taxi pulled into the Toronto evening. She pulled her coat tighter and picked up her bag and headed back to the room in Ontario. She had no idea who Thomas Osei was. She returned to work on Monday. No days off. She came back to the familiar rhythms of the facility the way you return to something you know how to do, not because it brings you joy but because knowing how to do it is its own form of stability. Her co-worker Beatrice, a Trinidadian woman in her 50s who had been at the facility for 11 years and who had the particular perceptiveness of someone who has seen many people arrive at their worst and has learned to see through the worst to the person underneath it, fell into step beside her during the first break and handed her a cup of tea without a word. They stood in silence for a while. Nkechi said it had not gone the way she planned, the trip home. Beatrice said she could see that. Nkechi said he was marrying her sister in the house she had built. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some men do not steal from your wallet. They steal from your years. And that is the kind of theft that never comes with a receipt." Nkechi held those words the way you hold something that is true in a way that is useful rather than merely accurate. She carried them through the weeks that followed. The weeks were hard in a different way from before. The physical hardness of the work was the same, but the reason she had been enduring it was gone, and she had to find a new reason before the enduring became something it could not sustain. She found the new reason slowly, in the small and specific way that people find the next reason after the previous one has been taken from them. For the first time in 6 years her full salary remained in her account. She bought a heater for her room, the first purchase she had made in 6 years that was purely for her own comfort. She bought proper food and cooked real meals and sat at her small table and ate them without calculating what the meal was costing against what she should have been sending instead. She opened her laptop in the evenings and looked at her accounts the way she had always looked at numbers, with the focused attention of someone trained to understand what numbers are saying. But now the numbers she was looking at were hers entirely, and looking at them and planning with them produced a different feeling from the 6 years of looking at a salary and calculating what she could keep after the monthly transfer was done. The feeling was not happiness exactly. It was something more foundational than happiness. It was the feeling of her own life beginning to belong to her. For months after she returned from the trip home, her shift supervisor, a quiet woman from Newfoundland named Sandra, called her aside at the end of a shift and handed her a business card. She said a law firm in Toronto had called the facility asking for Nkechi Obi. She had confirmed the employment. She hoped that was acceptable. The card said Pemberton and Associates, Estate and Probate Law, Toronto, Ontario. Nkechi looked at it for a long time. Estate and probate law meant someone had died. Someone had died and a law firm in Toronto was specifically looking for her. She put the card in her pocket and went home and made dinner and sat at the small table and propped the card against her water glass and looked at it while she ate. She had learned from 6 years of misplaced faith not to let her heart run ahead of the facts. She waited until the next morning to call. The lawyer answered directly. He had the careful, measured voice of someone who has delivered important news many times and understands the weight of each delivery. He said he was sorry to inform her that Thomas Yoose had passed away peacefully at his home in Toronto 8 weeks ago. He was 77 years old. He had no surviving family. His wife had died a decade earlier. He had no children and no siblings. Until 10 weeks ago his estate had been directed entirely toward charitable institutions. He said Mr. Osei had returned from a trip to Nigeria 10 weeks ago and had contacted their office immediately to revise his will in a significant way. He said Mr. Osei had left a letter explaining his decision and asked whether she would like him to read the relevant section. She said please. She heard paper unfolding. Then the lawyer read. He said, in the departure lounge of the Lagos airport on what was clearly the worst day of her life, a young woman stopped and helped an old man she had never met. She helped me for 2 hours. She paid for my tea when my card declined and she paid for my taxi when it declined again, $60 she clearly could not easily spare, and she did both of these things without embarrassment or expectation or any indication that she thought she was doing anything other than what was simply required of one human being encountering another human being in difficulty. I have lived for 77 years and I can count on one hand the number of times someone has helped me without any expectation of return. I do not want that quality of heart to go unrewarded. To Nkechi Obi, the young woman who helped me in the airport without knowing who I was, I leave the entirety of my estate. Nkechi sat on the edge of her bed in the room she could cross in 4 steps with the ground-level window through which she could see shoes passing on the pavement outside. The lawyer continued. He said the estate included Osei Global Freight, a logistics and shipping company operating across 4 continents. It included a property portfolio in Toronto and Calgary. It included investment accounts and liquid assets. The total assessed value at last review was approximately 165 million Canadian dollars. She sat with that number in the way you sit with something that is too large to process quickly. Outside the ground-level window life continued at its ordinary pace, shoes passing, the muffled sound of traffic, the smell of someone cooking somewhere above her. She said, very quietly, I am here. The lawyer said, gently, she should come to Toronto as soon as she could. They had a great deal to discuss. She gave notice at the facility that week. Sandra shook her hand and said she had been the most reliable worker she had ever supervised. Beatrice cried and then laughed at herself for crying and then held Nkechi's face in both her hands and said she had told her. She had told her she was going to be more than okay. Nkechi said you told me that. Beatrice said I know my people. She packed up the room. It did not take long. 6 years of deliberate minimalism produces very little to pack. She stood at the door and looked at the small space one last time, the narrow bed, the heater she had finally bought, the ground-level window, the hook on the back of the door. She said nothing to it. She picked up her bag and walked out. Toronto in May was a different kind of city from the Alberta facility. She arrived on a Wednesday morning and stood in Union Station with her bag and a new coat, a real coat, proper and warm and chosen for herself, and she breathed. She had 4 hours before the appointment with the lawyer. She went to a cafe near the station and bought a full breakfast, eggs and toast and fresh orange juice and a large coffee, and she sat at the window and ate it slowly and watched the city outside without calculating what the meal was costing against anything. It was the first meal she had eaten like that in 6 years. The meeting with Pemberton and Associates lasted nearly 4 hours. Nkechi asked precise and specific questions about the structure of OSE Global Freight, its operating companies, its liabilities, its management, its debt ratios, its cash flow, its logistics contracts across the 4 continents it served. She asked about the property portfolio in granular terms. She asked about the investment accounts and the tax implications of the inheritance under Canadian law. By the 3rd hour the lawyer had put his pen down and was simply watching her. He said she was not what he had expected to find sitting across from him. She asked what he had expected. He said someone overwhelmed. She said she had studied economics and had spent 6 years watching every dollar with complete attention and that watching money carefully was a skill that did not leave you simply because the amounts change. She did not move into the most expensive apartment in Toronto immediately. She rented a proper place with heating and real light and a window that faced the sky rather than the pavement, and she worked with the legal and management teams of OSE Global Freight with the patience of someone who understands that you do not run something you do not first understand. She was methodical and thorough and still entirely herself, only with resources that matched the scale of what she was capable of. Beatrice came to visit 3 months later and walked through the apartment saying "Lord have mercy" at intervals. She stopped at the curtains and touched them. She said, "Nkechi, these match the cushions." Nkechi said, "Sit down Beatrice, I will make tea." 6 months after the inheritance she established a foundation. She called it the Concrete Floor Foundation, named for the thing she had stood on for 6 years. Its purpose was specific and practical: to support women from African countries working in low-wage positions abroad, the women who sent money home every month and ate plain food and wore their coats in double layers and built lives for other people with their sacrifice. The foundation offered emergency financial support, legal advice on contracts before women signed them, financial literacy training, and mental health support, because nobody had ever asked whether the women who showed up every morning and kept everything running were quietly falling apart inside. The announcement made news in Toronto and then in Lagos and then in other cities where the story of what had happened reached people who found it worth telling. It reached Chitty's city because these things always reach the cities they are most relevant to. Chitty was having a difficult year. The property business he had spoken about for years had not performed the way he had described it to investors who had since withdrawn their capital. The bank had moved against the house when payments stopped and the foreclosure process was advanced. Adora had left 4 months after the wedding, quietly, with a note that said they had both probably known this was a mistake. Chitty sat alone in the house Nkechi had paid for and opened his laptop and typed her name and found a news article with a photograph of her in a grey coat smiling and a headline that told him the story he had not anticipated being told. He called her number. She picked up on the 5th ring. She said his name. Just his name. No warmth and no performance of coldness. He said he had seen the news. She said she knew that was why he was calling. He tried several angles. He said he had been wrong. He said his family had applied pressure he had not known how to resist. He said Adora had pursued him and he had been weak. He said he had always known Nkechi was the one. He said if she could see it from his perspective. She said she did see it from his perspective. She said from his perspective she had been a reliable source of funding during a building phase and he had made a calculation about what the next phase required and acted on it and she understood the calculation completely. She said the question was not whether she understood it. The question was whether she owed him anything in response to it. He was quiet. She said she was going to tell him something clearly so he could remove it from the options he was considering. She said she did not hate him. She had processed the experience and she understood it and she had moved forward and the moving forward was complete. She said this meant there was no anger in her that he could use as an opening. She said what she felt for him was the specific indifference that arrives when something that was once significant becomes simply a fact that happened. She said the bank would take the house. She said honest work was still available to a man who was willing to do it with his own hands, and she had demonstrated what honest work done consistently and with integrity could eventually produce. She said she would not be part of whatever came next for him. She ended the call. 8 months after the inheritance, Nkechi flew back to Onitsha. She came not as a visitor returning from abroad but as herself, the person she had become through every shift and every cold morning and every dollar sent and every betrayal absorbed and every act of kindness given to a world that had not immediately given anything back. She came with a purpose. The Concrete Floor Foundation was opening its first office in Nigeria. Its work there would focus on women preparing to go abroad, giving them legal and financial understanding before they made commitments that could cost them years. It would run scholarships for young women studying economics, law, and accounting. It would provide the kind of preparation that she had not had. The opening was on a Saturday morning. The hall was full. Her parents sat in the front row, her father with his glasses and his careful attention, her mother with the expression of a woman who has watched her daughter go through something very difficult and come out of it as something even more specifically herself than she was before. Beatrice had flown in from Canada and was sitting 3 rows back wearing her best dress and already crying. At the back of the hall, quiet and unannounced, were 6 women from the Ontario facility who had heard about the foundation and made the journey. When Nkechi stood to speak, she looked at those 6 women first. She looked at them for a long moment before she said anything else. She said, 6 years ago I got on a plane with 1 bag and 1 plan that belonged to someone else. I thought I was building a home for us. What I was actually building was myself. I just did not have the information to understand that while it was happening. She said the concrete floor did not break her. The cold did not break her. Being called useful and then discarded in the house she had paid for did not break her. She said these things not because they were not painful, they were, but because pain that does not break you eventually becomes the very thing that explains your strength, and she wanted every woman in the hall to understand that the strength they were building through their sacrifice was real and belonged to them and could not be taken away by anyone who had taken advantage of the sacrifice that built it. She said to the women working in silence right now, sending money home, eating less than they should, wearing 2 jackets because a proper coat costs money she has assigned elsewhere, your kindness is not weakness. Your reliability is not a character flaw to be exploited. Your willingness to sacrifice is one of the most powerful things about you. What you need is someone to ensure it is directed toward yourself as much as it is directed toward others. That is what this foundation exists to do. She stood in the Onitsha sunshine after the ceremony, the warm Nigerian air around her, the sounds of the city she had grown up in filling the afternoon, and she thought about the basement room and the concrete floor and the crackers and the double jackets and the monthly transfer and the gate and the music and the red dress she had worn to a homecoming that was not what she had planned. She thought about an old man in an airport with 4 bags and a declining card and a phone he could not operate, sitting surrounded by his luggage while the world walked past without stopping. She thought about the $60 she had paid for his taxi, $60 she did not easily have, paid without calculation on the worst day of her life. Every bit of it had been necessary. Not fair. Not kind. Not chosen. But necessary in the way that the difficult things that shape you are always necessary when you look back from a distance sufficient to see the shape they have produced. The cold had not broken her. The betrayal had not broken her. The loneliness and the sacrifice and the 6 years of standing on concrete for 12 hours a day had not broken her because through all of it she had kept the one thing that nobody was able to take, the part of her that stopped in an airport for a struggling old man on the worst day of her life. Not because she expected anything. Not because she was performing generosity for an audience. Simply because it was what the moment required and she was the kind of person who responded to what the moment required. That was the part that had changed everything. Not the degrees and not the discipline and not the 6 years of accumulated endurance, though all of those things mattered. The part that had changed everything was the part she had always had and had never thought of as an asset because it had never occurred to her that kindness was a kind of capital that the world, given sufficient time, sometimes found a way to return. She stood in the Onitsha sunshine and she was 37 years old and she was magnificent and the whole story of her life was still ahead of her and she knew it. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this. Is there someone in your life right now who is sacrificing everything for someone who may not deserve it? Share this story with them. And tell us in the comments, has anyone ever taken advantage of your kindness? We want to hear from you. There are many more stories coming to this channel and they go even deeper than this one. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.